My next guest is an MMA journalist from Maine. His work is featured in a variety of publications, including All Access MMA and Low Kick MMA. And he joins me from the great state of Maine, Mr. Ryan Jarrell. Ryan, thank you for being here, my friend. It's an absolute honor to have you on the show.
I appreciate it. I appreciate it. Yeah, it's great to talk to you, Tyler. And just not to correct you, but everyone messes it up. My last name is actually Jarrell.
Oh, wow. Well, the more
Jarrell.
you know, right? Like,
Yeah, right. Yeah. It's funny because even like when I played football in high school, senior year, they announced me Ryan Jarrell. I'm like, come on, guys, you got to get it right at this point. So it
well,
happens a lot.
Mr. Jarrell, I apologize. And first and foremost, Ryan, I did want to hit up a little bit about just kind of the space that we find ourselves in. This is a very difficult space to really kind of like cut your teeth. And low key, people have like approached me like, Tyler, like, I'm thinking about getting into the MMA space. Should I? And my initial reaction is, I don't recommend this. And that sounds really terrible, but I do think it requires a special type of person to be in this. And I'd love to get your take on what compelled you. Like, how did you get your start in this? And what does it take to like sustain your presence in this very competitive environment we find ourselves in?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, it is the sport of MMA as a whole. I feel like when you look at the big four, right? The NBA, the NFL, MLB, and NHL. Those sports have been around for such a long time, and they have such a huge following that with MMA, like with the pop of the UFC in particular, that a lot of like younger journalists they feel like it's there's more access to the fighters. You can get access to them easier than you could from somebody, on the Boston Celtics. It's just not going to happen. You're not going to get a chance to interview some of those guys. They're outside of your reach. So I feel there's a lot of younger people out there that see an avenue to get their foot in the door, which is great because that's the same thought process that I had when I first got into it. To go back to how I got into doing what I'm doing now, I graduated from the University of Maine in 2008 with a broadcast journalism degree. Instead of staying local and just, getting into, sports and covering that, I've always been a huge fan of movies. I'm a goofball at heart. I like joking around a lot. I can do a variety of impressions. I moved out to California and I pursued some acting and whatnot. Long story short, I moved back to Maine in 2013. And when I did, it was almost like pressing a restart button. A lot of things had changed. I didn't really know, what steps I was going to take to, move forward as an adult and find the right career for myself. So I started a podcast with somebody that I met. And at first it was just, audio, and it took off. Luckily, the lone promotion that's in the state of Maine, New England Fights, they sponsored us and we built a relationship. I interviewed a lot of their fighters, so that was really nice. I got to kind of cut my teeth interviewing a lot of regional fighters, via audio, but also in person. We had a studio at this restaurant downtown, so we did a lot of interviews, and I mean hours and hours, hundreds of hours, really, cutting my teeth, getting those reps in, and then over time, I made the transition to video. In the middle of all that, I started doing the commentary for New England Fights, and things just kind of gradually progressed for me, and get to where I'm at now, where I'm fortunate enough to work for All Access MMA. I do some for Low Kick MMA, and I get to talk to a lot of fighters, the UFC, Bellator, etc. And I still do all the regional interviews because that's something that's important to me. But you're right, it's hard to progress in this space. Someone like I use James Lynch as an example. He's been somewhat of like a mentor to me, and we're right around the same age, but he's been in it longer than I have, and he's got such an amazing following. And he's just been very very good to me with his time, and any questions I've had, he's been able to help me, as I continue to move forward. But it's hard. It's hard if you get in and you think that you're just going to blow up and become a James Lynch. Good luck. We've talked off air before, and the biggest thing for me is understanding that there's no overnight success. You're going to have to put in the work. You're going to have to cut your teeth, interviewing or doing shows at a lower level. You just can't go straight into the UFC and call up Conor McGregor and be like, "Hey, Conor, let's do this interview." It doesn't work like that. You need to work very hard for a really long time before you even get to a point where you're interviewing those UFC fighters, especially the high level ones. So keeping my head on straight and understanding that has been probably the best thing for me, because I've and again, as I've told you before off air, it's hard when you work extremely hard and you put those reps in and you're not maybe where you feel like you should be, right? And do I wish I was a little bit further along? Of course. I mean, we all do. But you got to remember why you got into this to begin with, because you love the sport. And if you're fortunate enough to be doing this and you make even a little bit of money, then you're doing something right. And that's what I continue to remind myself. I just keep my head down. I keep grinding. And as long as I'm putting out quality work, which I feel like I am, that's all that matters. Everything else will fall into place. And again, if you got to do it because you love it. So
One thing that I would say in just the short amount of time, in the couple of years, which isn't a long time that I've known you, I feel like the landscape has already changed quite radically. And I use social media as kind of like a blueprint. I remember who was also kind of coming around the same time that you and I were. And a lot of those people aren't here anymore. There's been a ton of turnover. Don't get me wrong, there's still some people that are still around, but like I almost feel like there are a few of us that have stuck around, but a lot of people have just kind of come and gone. In your opinion, like what's the reason for all that turnover?
well, I think it comes back to, why you got into this to begin with. Like if you got into it because you love it, and you just feel fortunate to be covering the sport of MMA, it's more likely that you're going to stick around. If you get in there and you just think you want instant gratification, and you're going to get signed by MMA Fighting or MMA Junkie or whatever, I mean, that's just, that doesn't happen for very many people. Look at Mike Heck. He very similar. A lot of stuff that he did is what I'm doing now, and he got picked up by MMA Fighting, and now he's got a phenomenal full-time job. He's very well known in the industry, as a journalist, a reporter, and he's killing it. But a lot of people expect to take that next step, and if they don't, they fizzle out. And it comes back to, you got to love what you're doing, and you got to be in it, be for the right reasons. And that's what I see anyways, when I look at people that don't stick around like you and I. Maybe they just didn't love it like we do. I feel very fortunate to be in the position that I am, and to be interviewing the fighters that I am, and talking to great people like you.
I wanted to talk a little bit about setting a blueprint for a novice out there that may have stumbled on this video. MMA, like people are seeing this, people are seeing the opportunity. They're seeing like people with small followings, such as myself, out there, and they're like, this Tyler guy, like, whatever, he's a dime a dozen. I think I could do that. And I don't take that with any offense whatsoever. It's like, if you think you can do what I do, by all means, go for it. And I wish you nothing but success. And I feel like people will, if they haven't found out when they first start, they will soon. You'll very quickly understand that media, your fellow media people, aren't your competition at all. You are going to rely on them heavily. And in order to be successful, you really need to become a part of that community. And the sooner you figure that out, the better you're going to be. So that's like my one talking point that I would say. But then the second one, and I hope you can expand on this is such a relationship based business. If you're going to have success over a sustained period of time, you really need to invest in relationships early and often. And I'm hoping you can kind of like pick the baton up for me and expand on that maybe a little bit more on why that's so important in the MMA media space.
And see, to piggyback off of that, Tyler, I don't think it's just important in this space. I think it's important in anything that you do. Everything is relationship building. My full-time job, I work for Reyes Radiology. I'm an account executive in Bangor, Maine. And part of the reason why I've been successful in that role is because I've built quality relationships with the right people at the offices in my territory to help them understand my role, how I can help them, and in turn help their patients. And so no matter what industry you get into, it's relationship building. Ed Cap, who does the PR for Iridium Sports, has been nothing short of amazing to me. Talk about building that relationship with him. Funny story, I'll tell you. When I first got in, I didn't quite understand the right way to utilize, what Ed does, and I thought, okay, I book an interview with the fighter that's rep by Iridium, and I post the interview and I tag them, then they'll share it, right? They're going to share it. Well, that's not the way that it works. What he does is he helps set up the interviews with these fighters, and then it's on you. You have to share it. You have to tag that fighter. You have to hope that they share it, in order to help get it out there to all the MMA fans that would watch it. But once I built that relationship with Ed and I understood, what his role is and how we can mutually help one another, the relationship just took off. And now I talk to him on a weekly basis, and he's just absolutely amazing at what he does. So that's one person I'll say, if you're a younger journalist and you're looking to get into the game and cover the sport, Iridium not only reps UFC fighters, they rep fighters at every level, whether it's, the top of the line, UFC, Bellator, PFL, whatever it may be. And then regional fighters all over the country, all over the world that really could be, top dogs one day. So you start from the ground up, you're not going to be getting those big UFC interviews right out of the gate. You interview the fighters that aren't, very well known, but that's how you cut your teeth. You build those relationships, and then you just keep grinding. You put your head down, you grind, you put out good content, you do it because you love it, and you'll be successful. But you're right. You're 100% right. Everything is relationship building. I go back to James Lynch, how much I leaned on him with questions that I had. I was like a deer in the headlights when I first started trying to figure this all out, and I'm still figuring it out. And 8 years later, a lot of growing pains, but I'm still here, and I'm not going to go anywhere because I love what I do. So, and again, it's a part-time job for me. I got a full-time job, and most people in this space, they're doing it part-time. You're very lucky. You're one of the very few that would have a career in this full-time. If you're in that space, you're in a select group, you're in rarefied air. So most of us, as you, doing it part-time. So you got to do it because you love it.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more. I wanted to shift a little bit, Ryan, and talk more broadly about the MMA media space at large. And it kind of like we slalom in and out of professionalism in this industry very often. Like Google UFC, Google MMA, and you'll see some very tongue-in-cheek headlines. You'll see some publications push out stories that even go as far as to like make fun of these fighters or take like thinly veiled shots at them. And I kind of wanted to like get your opinion. Like when you're trying to establish yourself, when you're trying to build up your own reputation in this space, is that a challenge? Like that, the whole media dynamic, a lot of people just don't like the media. Is that a bit of a challenge? Do you have to like chip through some ice and really work on like building rapport with fighters because of the strange dynamic and the strange relationship some fighters have with the media?
Yeah. I mean, everyone is unique to themselves, right? I'm not going to name any names, but there are certain fighters that are an absolute joy to interview, and they have been very good to me, and they've reciprocated that appreciation, and they'll follow you back on social media, and they'll share your interviews, and they'll message you afterwards and say, hey, it was great talking to you again. I mean, that kind of stuff goes a long way with me. And then there are other people, other fighters that aren't as that don't show you that love quite as much, and it just depends on the individual. But you're right, like building those relationships and understanding that not everyone is going to see the value in maybe what you do, or some fighters just don't even want to do media. They're like, that's, I don't even want to deal with that. All I want to do is train and fight. I totally get that. It's funny, and again, I'm not going to name a name, but there's a certain UFC fighter that said to me after I did my first interview with him that, man, I get more nervous doing these interviews than I do before I step into the octagon. And I was like, really? That's crazy to me. I'd be like ready to, crap myself. If I was getting ready to step into the octagon and fight in front of the whole world, I'd be scared to death. Especially on that level, right? But yeah, some of these guys, they feel uncomfortable. This isn't their wheelhouse. But with the way that the world has changed and social media and putting yourself out there, it's almost, it's not almost, it is, it's a necessity to do that to build your brand. And some of these guys, it's not something that they like to do. So you have to understand it's every individual is going to be a little bit different. And you need to go into, if you're going to get into this space, you got to understand that before, you really get far into it. Otherwise you're going to get your feelings hurt. You're going to feel a certain type of way about it.
What makes for a good interview in your eyes? Like there's such a plethora of MMA content that's out there. And I don't know about you, but sometimes I get ADD and I just like, I watch some of these on YouTube. I get 3 minutes in. I'm like, I just can't do this anymore. Like, this is just really super boring to me. And it sounds like any other interview I've ever heard in my life. Like, I'm already asleep. In your mind, like, what makes for a good, compelling interview that you want to listen to?
Okay, right out of the gate, you got to have good video and audio quality. You have to have that. And that's something that I look back at some of my earlier interviews and I cringe. I'm like, oh my God, like, why didn't I just pay the money to get what I needed to get early on? I feel like I probably be even, way further along than I am right now, because I even very recently I upgraded to this Shure mic. This is a game changer. This is the 7 MB. It's the next step down from like the big one that Joe Rogan and all of them use. It's worth every penny. And I have this headset in right now. You can plug it right into the microphone. It's an absolute game changer, and it makes you feel like you're in a studio, like a professional studio, sitting here doing this interview. So you gotta just spend the money, get the top quality microphone, get the camera that you need to make sure that you have good video. That's where you start. But then as far as the actual interview goes, got to do your research. You gotta know who it is that you're interviewing. You got to know their backstory a little bit, if there's anything specific to their most recent fight, and then obviously their upcoming fight, if they do have one. You need to focus on that. One thing I've done in the past too, Tyler, is that I'll kind of build up to the fight, right? Some people, they're watching the interview, some people like that, some people don't. If you follow me and you watch my interviews, if you're a gambling junkie and you just want to know what they think about their upcoming fight, you can kind of fast forward right to like the last 10 minutes of the interview, because I kind of build my way up to it. I'll start with camp, or I'll talk about their most recent fight, but you got to kind of have your thing. You got to kind of outline your interviews and script it the way that you feel like makes sense. But what comes with that is making sure that you do your research. So you hit on the key topics, get on Twitter, get on Instagram, see if they've posted something, if they're beefing with somebody, so you can ask them about it. You got to do your research. That's what being a legit journalist is all about. So when you add all of that together, I think that's what makes, having a really good quality interview. And then when you have, your guests and you have a good rapport with them and you don't overtalk them and you allow them to speak, you're doing everything right.
I couldn't agree with you more. I think the when in doubt, study longer. When in doubt, if you have any sort of hesitation or nerves, it's probably because you didn't prepare enough. So I always think back to myself like, okay, if I ever feel like I'm nervous in front of an interview, and I have a few times, and I'll share a cool story, but I always think back to myself and I'm like, well, wait a minute, did I do the prep? Did I do my homework? If the answer is yes, then I don't have anything to be nervous about. And that always is like a calming feeling to me especially when I'm getting ready to interview a high profile guest, because that's where the nerves really originate from. Like you get nervous because it's like, oh shit, did I do everything I need to do to make sure this is a successful interview? And that's where people get jammed up. The most nervous I've ever been for an interview was when I interviewed Randy Couture a couple months ago. Talk about an oh shit moment, because here we are talking about a guy that I've watched growing up fight on TV. And back in those days, you had to actually call your cable company and say that you wanted to buy the pay per view. There was no ESPN. Most of us didn't even have reliable internet in those days. And to go from like that moment in the early 2000s, paying $20 or whatever to watch him fight, and then flash forward to, here we are 20 some odd years later, and he's sitting in front of me. It was a really surreal moment. And I wanted to ask you, Ryan, is there a comparable experience that you've had? Because I know that you've interviewed a number of high profile guests. I've seen a few of them from my early young man days. I'm like, holy shit, I remember that guy. And here you are talking to him. So I'd love to know a story that you have about a similar sort of arrangement.
Yeah, it's Robert Whittaker. But before we get to that, I got to tell you a story about Randy Couture. So I lived out west. When I told you after college I moved out to California. I lived in Southern California. I valeted at Duke's, which is right smack in the middle of Malibu. It's a high end. Well, it's kind of like a tourist trap. A lot of people go there. Well, Randy Couture came in a couple of times. The second time he came in, I felt like, we were friends, because the first time he came in, we talked a little while, and so next time he came in, I parked his car right up front next to the valet stand, and I held on to his keys because I wanted to make sure when he came out that I got to talk to him again before he left, right? And so, we were talking, and I don't know, 5 minutes or longer passes, and I'm just asking him everything MMA, and we've already cashed out with him. I charged him. I did all of that. And I forgot the whole time that I was just holding onto his keys. I didn't give him his keys. And like, I just held him hostage to like chirp his ear off. And I look back at it now, and I kind of laugh about it, because I could tell he was like, just give me my keys. Like, I'm ready to go. And finally, like, I was like, oh, here's your keys, Mr. Couture. And he's like, thanks. And boom, got in his car and just took right off. But yeah, you said Randy Couture, so I had to tell you that. It was the funniest thing. I look back at it now and I'm just like, oh God, but hey, it's Randy Couture. What are you going to do? It's Captain America. To answer your question, Robert Whittaker. I have been such a big fan of Bobby Knuckles. I love his fighting style. I love everything about him. So when I got to interview him, it was actually the second time I interviewed him. The first time it was just audio, which we're talking quite a while ago. This is before he was the champion, before he was, as big of a deal as he is now. The second time I interviewed him, it was video, and it was late at night, East Coast time. I think it was like 9 o'clock or 9:30 p.m., which normally that's when I'm going to bed, but I had to, stay up because this is the only time that could work for him. And I was nervous, man. My heart was pumping. It's because before just audio, I don't have to see him. He's not looking at me. He can't tell how nervous I am. And yeah, he couldn't have been any cooler, but I felt the nerves. I went back and I watched the interview, and it was okay. It was okay. I probably looked, to be fair, I probably looked like a fan interviewing him, because I was just such a big fan of him as a fighter. And that's going to happen, especially if you're newer in the game. You don't beat yourself up too bad about it if that happens, because you're going to learn from it. And now I have a completely different persona going into these interviews. It doesn't matter who I'm interviewing. I feel like I'm the same regardless. And that just comes with time. That comes with reps. But yeah, Robert Whittaker, man, I was nervous as hell for that one.
Yeah, and it's funny that you say that, Ryan, because I had a very similar experience with Anthony Smith. Like, he's like the person I have watched. I've watched every single one of his fights, going back to like Strikeforce. Huge fan, and I interviewed him like as a fan, not as like a member of the media. And you look back on it now after you get your reps in, it's like I can barely watch it. I'm
Yeah.
like, oh my gosh, it's such a fanboy piece, and it is. But I definitely learned from that. I was like, okay, well, like moving forward, like if I'm gonna be in this, like you really kind of have to like be mindful of that and know like there's a time and place for that sort of thing. But for me, like I can't. I'm gonna go into it where it's like, okay, I'm gonna like shut that part of my brain off. I'm just gonna start asking you tough questions, like as a journalist. So if I interviewed Anthony Smith again, it wouldn't be like, from a fanboy perspective, it would be like, hey man, you dropped your last fight against Johnny Walker. What happened? Like a
Mhm.
question I normally wouldn't ask. Like I would go right to the hard stuff right away. Where when you're a fanboy, you would probably skirt around tough topics like that.
Sure. Yeah. And see, that's the thing. If you want to progress and you want to do this full time, and your dream is to, work for one of those big publications. I mean, my dream, if I'm just going to be real with you, I've always wanted to work at ESPN. I don't know how likely that is, but that's ultimately a goal that I've always had, even if it's just, I mean, I'm sure they have part-time roles, contributors. That's why I got in this to begin with. And if you want to get to that point, you have to remain professional. You can't do a fanboy interview. You just can't. And good for us, early on in career, you get that out of the way. It's a learning lesson, and it just makes you better moving forward. And, I'm sure I could say the same thing for you. I know for me, it did. Now I've interviewed, a lot of high profile fighters since that Robert Whittaker blunder. But now I'm doing it the right way, and you have to have that mindset going in.
Yeah, absolutely. Ryan, I want to shift gears. I want to talk a little bit about the world of the UFC, if that's fine. And I kind of wanted to start off with Conor McGregor and Michael Chandler. Obviously, the Ultimate Fighter is going on right now. And, there are a couple things that I won't like delve too deeply into them. But number one, the ratings for the Tough, they aren't quite what was expected. I think that's a fair statement. MMA Fighting put out a piece on that. And then, of course, Conor McGregor finds himself embroiled in another controversy. I'm not going to talk too much about that, but Google it. If you don't know what we're talking about, Google it. You'll figure it out. And I want to just simply ask, in your mind, is McGregor Chandler, is that going to happen anytime soon?
I think eventually it's going to happen. And to not to get off topic here real quick, but I was at the Mohegan Sun for Michael Chandler's last Bellator fight. I was covering that event, and I was the reporter that asked him post fight. Obviously, there's a lot of rumors that you're going to be going to the UFC. What are your thoughts on a couple of specific matchups? Do you feel like a Conor McGregor fight in the eventual future is something that could happen? Is that something that you're looking forward to? And I caught a lot of flack on that. I remember looking online, people being like, "Why is this reporter asking him about that?" Well, look where we are right now. Michael Chandler is an elite fighter. He's, one of the best in the world. And that's a great fight for Conor. I think eventually it's going to happen. Right now, December is the time frame where it seems like it could happen. What I'm really interested about, Tyler, is Conor McGregor's health. Obviously, we saw what happened after that nasty injury. He clearly was in the weight room a lot. He blew up. He's jacked. He looks like he's 220 pounds of pure muscle, which is, that's a lot of weight for someone his height, his frame. So, eventually, I believe it will happen. But the big thing that the UFC wants, that the UFC needs, is for Conor to actually just get back in there, whether it's versus Michael Chandler or anyone else. Anytime he fights, it's must-see TV. If you're an MMA fan, if you're a combat sports fan, it's must-see TV. You don't miss it. So, long answer, but yes, eventually, I believe it will happen. I'm hoping December is the right time frame for it. Cap the year off right with McGregor Chandler.
For Conor McGregor, in specifically, regardless of the outcome of this fight, in your mind, is he still a bona fide contender for the 55 title?
Yeah, I mean, he's still the biggest name, in MMA. If he goes out there and gets starched and Chandler finishes him early and Conor looks awful, he's gonna need to win a couple of fights before we get back to talking about that again. Mm-hmm. Conor's in a tough spot. He does need to win this fight. If he wants to get back to a title shot in the very near future, he's got to go in there and put it on Chandler, which I think he can. I think just based on their styles, I think someone's, getting TKO'd probably in the first round. But yeah, Conor with the losses that he's suffered, he can't afford to lose too many more, especially if he wants to stay in that title discussion. But with someone like Conor McGregor, with the name as big as it is, all it really takes is, one big win to put him right back in the title mix, because it's all about selling pay-per-views and making money.
Yeah, absolutely. And let's talk about another UFC champion. I want to shift the conversation over to Aljamain Sterling. This is a really interesting situation here. When I think of Aljamain Sterling, I actually think of a lot of activity. You're talking about a guy that's been answering the bell and showing up on fight night and defending his title with great frequency. He's already defended earlier this spring when he got a split decision victory over Henry Cejudo. And now, of course, he's going to be in a very high profile fight in your neck of the woods for the UFC Boston show that's going to be upcoming very, very soon. What's your take on just that whole dynamic with Aljamain Sterling and the UFC. In your mind, does it kind of feel like they're trying to like push him out, or is it just kind of like a really strange business relationship between the two?
Yeah, I don't, I don't really know. I honestly, I just finished before we did this interview here. I just finished interviewing Gerald Meerschaert, who fights Andre Petroski at UFC 292. And one of the things I asked him was, "Do you feel like Aljo is the most disrespected champion in the UFC?" Because that's what I think. I feel like he never gets his due. He's so well rounded. He's so good, and his resume is phenomenal. Some of the wins that he has, it's just elite. So it's a weird dynamic, isn't it? But if he continues to go out there and take care of business and win, I mean, why would the UFC not want him to be a big name, a big star in their promotion? I mean, he doesn't get in any trouble outside in his personal life. He's a great fighter. I mean,
Very true.
sign me. I'm an Aljo fan, man. I think he beats Sean O'Malley. I think he beats him soundly.
Were you a little surprised when you found out that his name was being floated for the Boston show, considering he just fought in May?
No, because I think he said he wanted to fight again really soon.
Mm-hmm.
And Boston's pretty close to Jersey. It wouldn't be too far of a travel for him to be there. So um yeah, I guess I wasn't too surprised. And it's not like he took a whole lot of damage. So, and these guys, especially, when you're in your prime, which he is right now, you want to stay active. You want to, if you're looking for legacy and you want to be one of the best ever, you got to defend that belt, and Alger's on his way to doing it. So I'm not surprised. I'm excited to see him back in there.
For the Boston card specifically, one thing that I'm not from New England, so I want to preface this by saying I don't have a dog in the fight, but I look at it and I feel like this is a missed opportunity. I felt like they could have done a better job featuring more New England talent. When you look at the UFC roster and you look at some of the top regional guys from New England, are you a little surprised that we're not seeing a Connor Matthews? Are you a little surprised that we're not seeing a Joe Giannetti on the UFC Boston card?
Well, August 19th is still a little ways away. So I believe that we're probably going to get a New England fighter or two on that card as we get closer. Right now, it's just Rob Font. Obviously, Calvin Cater is still healing up. I'm not sure when he's going to be back fighting, but geez, it would have been so nice to have both Cater and Font, on that main card. But Font's got another, tough opponent on his hands. I think Joe Giannetti has deserved it at this point. I think he should get the call, and I think he will. I really do. I think it might be another couple of weeks before we start hearing some rumblings. As Tyler, the closer we get to a fight night, injuries happen, stuff happens. There's going to be short notice replacements. I think we're going to see another fighter or two from New England, and I bet Giannetti's one of them.
I certainly hope so. And I couldn't agree with you more. He is definitely deserving of an opportunity. And I have one kind of final question for you. And it's simply this: when we think about the UFC, we think about the star power. We've already named off some of these names, but we'll kind of go through them. Of course, we have Amanda Nunes, who just recently retired. Kamaru Usman, Conor McGregor, Henry Cejudo, Michael Chandler, Justin Gaethje, Colby Covington. Like those are just some of the names, and I'm mentioning all of these names for a reason. And Ryan, you're a smart guy; you probably understand exactly why I'm naming all of these in this string. They're all in their mid 30s. And you're talking about the biggest stars in MMA. Yes, there are some young, exciting Ian Garys, Aaron Blanchfields in the pipeline, but there are a lot more fighters toward the tail end of their career that are very, very marketable that are bona fide stars in the UFC. And I wanted to ask you, like, do you think that there's a potential pipeline issue?
Well, I think we're a little bit spoiled with Conor McGregor, right? Like Conor McGregor is such a big star that it makes everyone else, look very kind of run of the mill. Is just, basketball. I'm a huge basketball fan. Michael Jordan, when he was in his prime, there was nothing greater. Like what he did for the game of basketball, it was just like watching a rock star come out to his stage, which was the court every night. And we were very spoiled to have that with Conor McGregor. there isn't another massive star like that. I don't necessarily know that there's a pipeline problem, but it's very rare when someone kind of checks all the boxes. The person that I feel like right now is that in his prime, and I don't know how old he is, but it's Izzy. I love Israel Adesanya. Everything about him. He's a massive star. He talks the talk. He walks the walk. I think everything about the guy checks the boxes to be a massive star. He just needs to go out and keep winning. And I think what we're seeing with him is kind of like GSP towards the end, where he's winning a lot of decisions. That big win that he had over Pereira when he put him out, that was huge because it was reminded people that he could go in there and finish fights. Because at the end of the day, that's what the casual fan wants to see. They want to see you finish fights. They want to see knockouts. They want to see, great stand-up striking battles. And I feel like with Izzy, there was, he was playing safe. He was fighting safe, kind of like, what Floyd Mayweather did. He fought not to lose. And I think if Izzy can fight a little bit more like he did against Pereira in his last fight, he could take that next step. But the tricky part for him is he's kind of already cleared out the division. I'd like another fight with Whittaker. There's still, Hamzat. That would be an interesting matchup. But yeah, I wouldn't say that there's a pipeline problem. I think that there's a superstar problem. They just don't come around like that very often. And in order to be a superstar, you got to win. You got to beat the best, and you got to look impressively doing it. People want to mention Paddy Pimblett. Like, he's great on the mic. He talks phenomenally, right? He's an exciting guy, but at the end of the day, I mean, Ilya Taporia would have beat the brakes off of Paddy Pimblett, and everyone knows it. You can't be a superstar unless you're the best of the best. So it's a rare combination of all of that stuff, and I don't think there's many in the game right now that really have that, especially at a young age. I'll tell you one guy, Tyler, that I'm excited about that. I don't necessarily know that he could be a super mega star, but his talent is there, and he's just super humble. He's such a great guy, and I think he's going to be a title contender down the line. Is Jack Della Maddalena. I love JDM. That guy's an absolute beast, but he's not a showman. He's not like Izzy or Connor, but he's someone that I feel like is on the come up, and you can kind of keep your eye on to maybe take that next step and be a big star one day.
And I will counter that with somebody that I think is going to be a rising star, and that's Erin Blanchfield. I look at her, and I think you're looking at the face of female MMA for the world. Like, I look at her, I look at how good she is, and there needs to be a new person that takes on that mantle of being like the face of like female mixed martial arts, with Cyborg nearing the twilight of her career, with Amanda Nunez, of course, leaving. Holly Holm is probably on the way out as well. Like, somebody needs to like pick up that mantle of like being that like young, exciting superstar. And I look at Erin Blanchfield, and I look at what she's doing against the likes of some of the best fighters in the world, and I can't help but be overly impressed. And she's not even close to her athletic prime. I look
Yeah.
at her and I see somebody who could become one of the greats. That might sound like hyperbole, but I look at her and I just can't help but like think so highly of her. What's your opinion on Erin Blanchfield?
Oh yeah, I think she's amazing. She's definitely a future champion. And right above your right shoulder, you got Valentina Shevchenko, who, for my money at one point in time, I mean, I thought that she was the best pound for pound female fighter on the planet. I still think there's an argument to be made that she won that second Nunez fight. Um, Talk about Alexa Grasso. If I was betting on that fight, I would have lost everything because I was like, oh, Shevchenko's going to kill her. Grasso, wow, she's another one too. She checks a lot of the boxes. I think both Grasso and Blanchfield could be, big stars. But the key is you got to win, and it's tough to win. You get to the top of the heap, and you're fighting the best of the best. One mistake, you move wrong once, you get clipped, and it's all over. So that's the thing. It's really tough to capture, to get the top of the mountain, get there, and to stay there.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. You zig when you should have zagged, and that's how Julia Pena becomes the champion, and that's how Alexa Grasso became the champion. One small error, one small miscalculation, and it could just put into motion a totally different butterfly effect. And that's true in every sports, but I feel like it's like way more significant and way more obvious in mixed martial arts. Ryan, before I let you go, I want to actually give you an opportunity. You're a man of many talents. You're in the commentary booth. You have your own show. You have a gambling show where you discuss picks, which I think is really exciting. Can you tell the good people out there, like, what are some of the things that you're working on right now that they can look forward to seeing?
Yeah, well, my next commentary gig will be at NEF 53 on July the 8th in Portland, Maine. If you ever wanted to watch one of those, it's at combatsports.now. You can go and buy the pay-per-view. I believe they're $25 to buy it. But yeah, another great card. Honestly, to tell you the truth, Tyler, that's probably what I enjoy doing the most when I do the commentary and it's live like that. I just feel so alive. I feel so alive when I'm doing the commentary. I try to go into my John Anik mode and do the best job that I can, but it's really such a blast. And my commentary partner, Greg Williams, is amazing to work with. And Joseph Holmes is actually going to be flying up and being the third man in the booth for this NEF 53 card. So it's going to be myself, former UFC middleweight Joseph Holmes, who will be back in the UFC one day, mark my words, and Greg Williams as the three of us for NEF 53. So that's around the corner. As I mentioned, Joseph Holmes, I do a podcast with him, Ugly Truth Fight Picks, which is on All Access MMA. We do that for every UFC event. So we'll have another one coming up later this week. And I believe our guest this week is going to be Cody Durden. So he'll be the third man to do picks for that UFC event. You can catch most of my work. All Access MMA is where most of it is. I have my own personal YouTube channels, Ryan Jarrell Sports, where I put my UFC Bellator interviews. And then I have Between Rounds Radio, which is my regional content. Any regional fighters that I interview will be on there. I still contribute to Low Kick every once in a while, but All Access MMA has kind of like been my mainstay, and I'm very fortunate to be with them. But yeah, that's what I have in the pipeline. I'm hoping to be at UFC 292 as a reporter covering that. So hopefully you'll see me there as well.
Well, Ryan, I really appreciate your time this afternoon. It's been a true honor to have you on the show. And if there's anyone that you want to thank or any thing that you need to plug, let's knock that out before I let you go.
I just want to thank you, Tyler. I appreciate you asking me to be on here. It's been great talking to you. I think you do a fantastic job with all of the content that you do. So make sure you follow Tyler Little on all of his platforms, because he's a great young journalist on the come up. So keep at it, my man. I appreciate you having me.
Thanks, Ryan.